Hare Krishna, hello world. This is yours truly, Vidyananda Das, here with our 40th live stream of the Bhagavad Gita. Behind me, of course, we have Mr. Sri Krishna, Sri Bhagavan, the protagonist in Bhagavad Gita, as it is, 1972 Deluxe Edition. Let's begin. Once again, I'm just going to do the invocation mantras how I like to do it, and you people can do whatever you want. You can follow me or do more or less. I don't care. This is how we do it here. Oh, before we start, this should be a short live stream. There's only 3 verses I'm going to do. They're all simple verses. They work together. And then the next 3 verses also go together. And that one might take more time. So I wanted to do just these 3. Chapter 6, verse 5 through 7 is what we're doing today. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. There we go, guys. I got all 8 long vowels pumped. Verse 5. A man must elevate himself by his own mind, not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. I'm really interested by that word degrade. The Sanskrit word is avasadayat, put into degradation. I believe in English, degrade means exactly what it looks like. It means your grade, whatever your grade is, A- goes to B, and B goes to C. You just remove a grade from wherever you're at. And don't kid yourself, there are grades. In the moral realm, in the spiritual realm, in societal realm, there are definitely grades. Maybe not in the spiritual realm. We are equal in that sense. But even though we're equal, some are closer to God than others. Some, may have a lot of God consciousness, but it's impersonal God consciousness, which is less close to someone who has God consciousness with the personal manifestation of God. We're all still equal, but it's just proximity can still be some difference there, and for good reason. So in this verse, it's explicitly stated and simply stated, this is a small verse with a small purport, that mind can be our friend and our enemy, and we go up or down, we prograde or degrade, if you will, according to our own free will and our use of intelligence. This may be a reminder for me and some others, but for many listening, I think the first sentence of the purport is really worth noting here, especially considering this verse. Atma shows up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. The word Atma shows up 7 times in this verse. So we might want to know what it means. And so Prabhupada says, the word Atma denotes body, mind, and soul, depending upon different circumstances. A lot of devotees I meet, they think Atma just means the soul. And that's true in a sense, in that the most pure primary use of the word may be soul, but that's not actually the only thing it means, especially if you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, and even more so if you're reading the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. Then you have quite a different conception, actually, of that word Atma. It's actually it's often used here as kind of a mundane pronoun, kind of just like I. Like Krishna is talking about the I. In the same way in English, when we say I like rice, what does that mean? Does that mean my soul likes rice, my mind likes rice, my body likes rice? Well, sometimes I mean my body likes rice. Sometimes I mean my mind likes it. Sometimes I mean my soul likes it. It keeps me in Sattvaguna or something. It actually means, sometimes one, sometimes all, sometimes, it changes, because Atma basically means just the self. That's a good translation. Instead of the soul, if you translate Atma as self, that's a much better translation. Because once again, in English, just like in Sanskrit, the self has different parts. There's the body, the mind, the soul, and so on. All of that are parts of the self. Now, without the soul, there would be no self. So, you can make the case that the most pure definition of Atma is not only the self, but the soul. That's fine. But I just think it's important we all remind ourselves how this actually works in the native tongue that this text is spoken in. So when I was reading this yesterday and taking notes on this, I did read the whole purport, but we're not going to go over it here. Because for this kind of verse, it's so concise and explicit and simple. If we go too deep into it, we actually risk losing the fundamental and practical truth and wisdom of it. I'm not saying we can't go deeper into it, but this is one of those verses where you're supposed to just say, oh yeah, okay. It's a setup. It's not just a setup, but it's foundational. So the mind can be our friend and our enemy. That's it. That you don't need to go any deeper into it than that. You can if you want, but you don't need to. And then obviously, as you might suspect, in the next few verses, be like, well, what kind of friend? What kind of enemy? And, that's for coming later in later verses. But for now, our job as readers and devotees and students and disciples of the Bhagavad Gita, and if you're lucky to also be a disciple of the author of this Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada, our job is to accept this as absolute truth. And once having done that, then we can question, then we can engage in philosophy. But it kind of starts with faith, actually. It's better when we just start it. Okay, wow, Krishna says it, Prabhupada restates it, like this is true. This is the truth. And then we can say, well, how is it true? And, what do I do with this? How is it relevant to my life as a kindergarten teacher or a plumber or a father or whatever? That's fine. Like we're supposed to engage in philosophy in that sense, which that philosophy comes from a foundation in truth, and there must be some faith in that truth. We're not supposed to just speculate and figure out everything ourselves. Krishna doesn't want us to. Prabhupada doesn't want us to. That's why these great souls have simply given it to us. They're simply giving. So we simply receive. That's it. Especially at a foundational level, that's it. We simply receive. And then from that foundation, you can go in different paths. There's Gaudiya Vaishnavas went down one path, and the other Sri Sampradayas, like those are different paths that all have the same foundation in the Gita. And for individuals as well, some people might really focus on the first hexad, the first 6 chapters of the Gita, like myself. Other people, the middle 6 chapters. Other people, the I was going to say third trimester, the third hexad of the Gita. That's fine. As long as no matter which thing you're focusing on, as long as you accept the fundamental truths here, and then how you have your own individual way of working with that, that's fine. And we can all be good friends, good family, and so on. What we are not allowed to do is to cheat, is to question in a disrespectful way. But I said this was going to be a short stream, so we're going to keep going, because if I go down that path, then it will really get lost quickly. Verse 6. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his very mind will be the greatest enemy. Keyword here for me is conquer. Jitaha, conquered. This verse also has Atma showing up several times. 4 or 5 times, it looks like. 6 times. So this verse is exactly what I mentioned earlier. It's just going a little deeper into just a one level, elaborated more into detail from the previous verse. So previous verse is just, well, what is the mind? It can be our friend and our enemy. And then here we see, well, it can be our best friend and our worst enemy. So Krishna is exaggerating, still keep staying within that truth, but showing how the exaggeration of how it can go different ways is just going to be really impactful on our lives. And also these exaggerations do help us really realize this truth. So accepting it and realizing it are kind of different things. Accepting verse 5 as true, any of these verses as true, you can accept it as true and have no realization of it. Accepting just means that you're not going to be disrespectful to the Gita, to your teacher, whatever, and just say, well, I think it's this way, actually, at any point. Right after you read the verse, or 10 years later, if at any point you say, oh, well, I changed my mind, maybe I think something else is true, then you didn't accept it. And you're not on the same level, you're not in the same school, you're just doing something else, which could be fine, if sometimes it's really not fine. If you have a position of power and status, like if you're a guru and you start acting like and saying like these things are not true, that's a big problem. But Krishna and Prabhupada give us all we need and more than we need to not only accept the absolute truth, but also to realize it. Just from this book alone, we can not only see and hear the absolute truth, we can accept it, which is hard. That's amazing. That's an impressive thing to do. But what really does it, what really changes our lives and changes the world, is to realize the truth, to see it, to really experience it, and then bring it into our daily lives and our moment-to-moment consciousness. That's the end goal here. This is not some dry philosophy book. This is something you live. It's a lifestyle. Quick analogy would be like Ashtanga yoga, Hatha yoga, and judo, Tai Chi, these sorts of things. They're not just bodily exercises that you just do, 7 o'clock at night, Tuesday to Friday or whatever, and then you go home and do something else. Like, you're supposed to incorporate the philosophy and those exercises into everything you do, how you sweep the floor, how you do your job, how you brush your teeth. Like, everything should be a judo, a yoga, whatever. Same thing with this Gita. In one sense, it's easier to do that with the Gita because the mind we have all the time. You can't get away from the mind. With something like judo, it's much easier for you to say, oh, well, how can I see how to apply judo in, when I'm driving a car? It's easy to say that, but you can never say, "Oh, the knowing the truth about the mind is not relevant to me." You can never say that. You can never, with a straight face, honestly say, "Oh, that's not relevant to me to learn how the mind works and what it is." You, as a human being, cannot say that. You're lying to yourself if you say that. You're simply a liar and a fool. Um, and I have no problem saying that, because if you're watching this stream, you're already past that point. Other people are not ready to hear that. That's too bad. You guys, you are. You are. Sorry if it hurts, but it's for your own good. So, yeah, once again, the key word in this verse is conquer. So, because our mind can not only be our friend and our enemy, but our best friend and our worst enemy, what are we supposed to do with it? How are we supposed to have a relationship with the mind? Well, Krishna now says explicitly, you must conquer it. And in the word for word translation and the colloquial translation, it's the same word, conquer. That's a military word. That's a kshatriya military word. You're supposed to whip that thing into shape. That is your place. The mind is lower, you are higher, and you're going to whip it into shape the same way a master whips a slave, a father beats a son or disciplines a son. I don't want to get too graphic here, but there are leader follower relationships. The same way, like in my classes, when they're bad, I take away a star. I don't give them as many stickers. Like, there are disciplinary things we do to things that are below us, that we need to lead and control and guide and so on. And that's the mind. The mind is not us. The self is higher than the mind. The self must conquer, control, and lead the mind. That is your place. That is who you are and what you're supposed to do. Once again, on a moment-to-moment basis, all the time, no matter what job you have, what male, female, whatever. This is your job. This is your constitutional dharma as a human-bodied soul, period. And a quick reminder from Prabhupada, he said this before, but he says, the purpose of practicing eightfold yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. I love that word, human mission, which is a nod to what he said earlier, that what is a human being made for? A human being is made to practice religion. What is religion? It's devotion to God with faith and rationality. Both faith and rationality. We're specifically designed to do that. We have prefrontal cortex, we have this special brain that can do rationality, but that doesn't change the fact that we are souls, and we have the super soul inside of us, just like every other living entity. But we have a free will and a rationality that allows us to consciously be one with nature and the supreme. The animals are oftentimes more in harmony than we are with nature and with the supreme, but they're unconscious. They're automatons, basically. And that's also why it's so bad when we are harmful or cruel to them, because they are a lot of times more advanced than us spiritually, and at least in one sense, they've not done any harm. They're innocent. They should not be touched in any harmful, cruel way, unless absolutely necessary. We should not bother any of these creatures, because they're fine. They're just doing their dharma in a way better than we are. So we should not touch or deal with any of these creatures, unless it's to feed them or help them in some way. Just we got to let them be them. And guess what? Same is true for other humans too, even within your own family. This is a good philosophy to practice. More from Prabhupada. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. And then surrender to the Lord follows automatically. I was paraphrasing that last line. So in that last part of the purport, Prabhupada mentions Paramatma a few times. Well, now in verse 7, we're going to see in Sanskrit the word Paramatma explicitly mentioned, which is really cool. Here's verse 7. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. So once again, we're on the same logical trend from 5 to 6 to 7 now. But now verse 7, we're going just a little bit deeper. And now we're at the supersoul. So before we learn that, we conquer the mind and we have this really great friend, this great ally that we have with us. But there's also a cost. If we don't do that, we may have a terrible enemy against us. And how do we deal with this? Well, we have to conquer it. Okay. And then, so we already know if you conquer the mind, you have the best friend. And also, what the additional thing in verse 7 is, you reach the super soul and you attain tranquility and peace. So you don't just get a best friend. You don't just get a great friend. You get an even better friend, the super soul. And even better than that, but wait, there's more. You get tranquility. You get peace. And I don't just mean like pleasure or happiness. This is a deeper peace because heat and cold, honor and dishonor, all those things will still be there, but you'll have a transcendental peace to that, where even when there's violence or whatever, some bad thing is happening, you'll just be responding peacefully to it because you have a deep inner peace. So basically, you win everything. By conquering the mind, you can win everything. And throughout this chapter and the next few chapters, Krishna's going to tell us specifically how to conquer the mind with Ashtanga Yoga. And once again, throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita and throughout these chapters, Srila Prabhupada will also reiterate that you don't need to do Ashtanga. It is not recommended if you are alive right now or even in the future, reading this Gita, hearing this stream or whatever. It's really hard. It's really hard to do that really well. It takes a lot of time and effort that we just don't have. It takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of physical strength that a lot of us Kali Yuga humans are losing by the second. I mean, there's toxins, poisons in our food and water, in our air, all over the place. It's now in 2024, it's now really hard to get away from this. You have to really, really go to the middle of nowhere. You have to really leave society to get away from most of this stuff. So what can we do? Well, we do bhakti yoga. We just we chant Hare Krishna. We just focus on Krishna. That's it. We focus our mind on Krishna, and Krishna does the rest. That's basically it. We just focus everything on Krishna. You don't have to worry about this technique or that technique. There's only one technique. There's only one philosophy. There's one panacea. And you just do that over and over again. And eventually it will work. So long as you're actually doing it, meaning you have to be sincere. If you're doing an external ritual like this, spiritual or religious ritual, but you're not sincere, or let's say you're a little bit sincere, but you're not humble at all, and you're in the back of your consciousness, you're thinking, oh, well, who is this God anyway, and whatever else, then you might be able to do 16 rounds of japa every day for 20 years and get zero improvement. And there are people like that. It's because they're not actually doing it. These are not material rituals. This is not like going to your job. It's there's nothing mundane about it. It's all about consciousness. And so we can only judge our progress by consciousness. We can only judge others in this sense by consciousness, which is basically impossible to do, which is why we're not supposed to do that at all. We're not supposed to get to even bother thinking about who's more advanced or less advanced, because it's just bloody impossible to even see. Our senses are not designed to see that. And the only way you can see that is by being basically just as advanced as that other person or more advanced. And even still, you can be wrong. Because the only way to know that is by intuition and by using your spiritual senses. And there's so much purity required to be scientific about it. There's so much purity required. It's really, truly not recommended, especially because look at the people like Prabhupada and Jesus Christ, the guys who actually have that high level. What do? Do they explicitly say, oh, you're a B plus, he's a C minus, so, I'm going to give you. No, they almost never do that. It's yeah, not much else I need to say there. Interesting how short the purport is for this verse. Okay, and then it's also important. So the second part of the verse, we talk about what are the symptoms of such a person who has conquered the mind and reached the super soul? Well, it's what has already been said before many times, as early as chapter 2. Equanimity, responding equally to hot and cold, good and bad, left and right, up and down, and so on. And detachment. That's it. And so one way you can get to a place of equanimity and detachment is just by practicing equanimity and detachment. There are many, like the Iceman, Wim Hof, who is famous for jumping into ice cold waters and not being affected by it. You can do that. Anyone can just, start desensitizing yourself to extreme hot, extreme cold, and eventually you will gain a physical equanimity and detachment to that. And that will start to generalize to your mind as well. And you can also practice equanimity in the mind by one thing I've gotten good at is in the social world, honor and dishonor when, people say things behind your back and, the natural state of affairs is to get really upset by that. But you can practice mentally not responding to any of this stuff and saying, I don't care. I mean, there's many ways to do it. One really mean way, which I did starting many years ago, I still do sometimes, and this is maybe not recommended, but it does work, is you just say, well, I don't care about that person. They're not my best friend. They're not my lover. I just don't care. So when they say, I like you, I don't like you, I love you, I hate you, I just genuinely don't care. I'm not going to have a response to that because I just don't care about that person. So, and this is also easier to do, I think, if you're a man than a woman, just because of how emotions run through the body and also the kind of place that the social life has in your life when you're a man versus a woman. So, and this is philosophy. Now we're doing philosophy. Now We're starting from the foundation that equanimity and detachment is a good thing. And then how do you get there? That's philosophy and also yoga. There's many different ways you can do that. That's it for my notes. We're just going to read this purport because it's really short. Prabhupada says, quote, "Actually, every living entity is intended to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. When the mind is misled by the external illusory energy, one becomes entangled in material activities. Therefore, as soon as one's mind is controlled through one of the yoga systems, one is to be considered as having already reached the destination. One has to abide by superior dictation. When one's mind is fixed on the superior nature, he has no other alternative but to follow the dictation of the Supreme. The mind must admit some superior dictation and follow it. The effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of the Paramatma, or Supersoul. Because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness, the devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence, namely distress and happiness, cold and heat, etc. This state is practical samadhi, or absorption in the Supreme." That's it for today, folks. 32 minutes. Good. Like I said, it was a little shorter than usual. I don't like to go any more than 30 minutes for these, but who knows? Who knows? Who knows how many more I'll do, how many more times I get to repeat these verses. This may be one and done for me. As far as saying these live and recording these, this may be it. Who knows? In this format, this could be just, I'll just read through the whole Gita and then that's it. I don't know. Have a good day. Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Hanuman.